Welcome to Making Eating Healthy Again, the podcast where we simplify the complexities of modern nutrition and guide you back to the basics of wholesome eating. In today's world, dietary recommendations become a maze of conflicting advice and overwhelming research and trending fads that make eating healthy feel more like an unsolvable puzzle. Each day brings new headlines on superfoods, diet plans, and miracle supplements, leaving us more confused than ever about what we should really be eating. Join us as we cut through the noise to uncover simple, science-backed practices that can transform your health, delight your taste buds, and make eating healthy a joyous journey once more. Whether you're a seasoned foodie or just beginning your quest for better health, we've got you covered with insights, motivational stories, and practical tips. I'm Woody Huffines, and I am fortunate to be able to join Registered Dietitian Danielle each week to talk to you about how you can make eating healthy again. It's been a couple of weeks since we talked. We're talking about Make Eating Healthy Again. There's been some pretty exciting news in terms on the Make Eating Healthy Again front since we talked, which is they confirmed Bobby Kennedy as Health and Human Services. How excited are you for that?
Oh my gosh, I am elated. I have watched his work for 20 years. And I can't imagine how he feels, right? I mean, the things that he says and he knows and he's tried to address everybody the same as I've felt that people feel about me, that he's crazy and he's full of a bunch of lies. He's going to harm America. I am elated that I think I mentioned this last time, even just a little bit of information and education is getting out there. And it's getting people to be more aware.
Well, at least we're starting to have the conversation. One of the things that excites me about it is that now we're at least starting to have the conversation.
Yeah.
And for a long time, there were lots of things that we could not discuss. And I got to tell you, if you had asked me 2 years, I'm like Joe Rogan. Did you see the Joe Rogan comedy special where he's talking about COVID?
I don't think I did.
Yeah, he was talking about COVID, and he's like, we lost a lot of people during COVID. Most of them are still alive. And he said,
I have heard that.
He said, if 2 years ago you had asked me about vaccines, I'd have said they're the greatest thing ever invented. Mm-hmm. And he's like, now I don't think we went to the moon. There's been such a fundamental shift in what we can talk about because there were so many things that happened during COVID that people were just like, wait, we have to talk about this now. And sure. I think Bobby's really at the forefront of that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how we have all just come to, if this food's able to be sold, it's got to be okay. Maybe it's not good for you, but it's okay and it's not going to harm you. If there's a vaccine and we're told to take it, that's what we should do. I mean, minus the fact that these people aren't even held liable for anything at all, which is ridiculous. But I didn't know that. There are so many things that I didn't know, even being a dietitian and working in the food industry, and that is because I was told all the things by food industries that were paid by all the lobbyists, like Pepsi and Nabisco and all that, right, to think the things I thought. But I think most of the world, and especially most of America, didn't think to second question foods, vaccines, any disease. Like, okay, we hear the word chronic disease, but what does that really mean? If we are spending $4.3 trillion a year on healthcare, is that a lot? Is that bad? Is that actually going up? Is it going down? I think people are starting to see, oh, that's right, we're spending trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars on healthcare, and yet our society's only getting worse. Depression is getting worse.
And I'll throw a graph in here to look at it, but it's an interesting graph. It shows the spending per patient in healthcare, what the spending per patient is versus the life expectancy. And the United States, which used to be way, way, way good on this graph, is now, as you can see in the graph, way, 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 way bad. Mm-hmm. Starting in about 1980, we quit growing our life expectancy and really started growing our costs in healthcare. Mm-hmm. So, for the Make Eating Healthy Again, what the Pareto concept is that 80% of the problem, or 80% of the work is done by 20% of the workers, yep. Or 80% of the problem is caused by 20% of the causes, or whatever, that Pareto concept. So for me, I think the only concern that I have about Bobby is where he's going to put that 20% of the effort, or how he divides up. And at the end of the day, 20% of the things that he attacks are going to get 80% of the results, or 80% of the things that are accomplished.
Right.
So my question, or the thing that I'm concerned about, is he's very energetic about vaccines.
Yeah.
He's very energetic about the chronic disease. He's very energetic about environmental pollution and poisons. I don't know that I've really come to water on where do I want him to go first, or where is that Pareto concept going to be the most useful.
Yeah.
I disagree with him about, I'm not there yet on the dangers of electromagnetic spectrum. Okay. That's a little woo-woo for me. I'm not there yet. But then if you'd asked me 18 months ago where I was on vaccines, I would be nowhere near where I am now on vaccines. If you had asked me where I am on food, I've been this way on food for a long time. So I've seen this cascade of, I believed what they said about food, and then I found out that they were wrong. And then I believed what they said about carnivore, and they were wrong. And then I believed what they said about the COVID vaccine, and they were really wrong. And so I don't know that I'm willing to say that Bobby's wrong about electromagnetic spectrum.
Right. That's a good way to put it.
But I do think that we've got a lot more leverage on the eating healthy. We can, with less effort, eating healthy is going to be more important than attacking electromagnetic spectrum at the extremes.
Sure, and I think that the public will appreciate it because it's something that they understand, right? Whenever you talk with somebody about anything in life, right? Whether it's business, it's counseling on mood, it's counseling on food. You always want to meet people where they are, or in just a general conversation, you meet people where they're at. And I feel that, one, it's going to make the biggest impact. But also I feel like the public is ready to hear it. Or maybe, I don't know if ready is the right word, willing to, or they have an open ear. As you said, there's a conversation about it. I do think it's going to make the biggest impact because at least it'll start to open people's eyes of, oh, maybe I don't have to be on medication, right? If I can get a person off one medication, not grabbing just one medication from their medicine cabinet in a month or 2 months or 3 months, that's amazing. The money they save, of course, but the impact that it does on their health, because that's not helping them. It's only degenerating cells.
Well, in the pharmaceutical cascade, I had this discussion. My dad passed away a year and a half ago, and I had this discussion with him about, he presents with problem A, whatever problem A is. And I won't go into the details, but you present with problem A, and the doctor goes, well, I got a drug for that. So you start taking drug A, which creates a side effect, which creates problem B.
Yes.
And it's like, well, I got a drug for that. And well, then pretty soon you're taking 5 drugs, 4 of which are treating the symptoms of the previous 3 that you took, and then the third one. It's just this cascade of that answer is, and all of it could have been solved if you had just started eating right.
It's so true. And I think what happens is you go to a doctor, they're going to say, okay, you need this medication. Well, that medication only works for a certain amount of time, right? So you're already nutrient depleted. Now you're taking a medication that most likely is going to deplete your nutrients as well. So now it's not working as much. So now you need a higher dosage, or now you need another medication on top of that, and a medication for another medication, another medication. Then something happens and you're like, man, I still don't know what's wrong. Now you go to the doctor, you figure out you need surgery. So then you get surgery. Then you get an infection from that. So now you're on a medication from that. And then we die. And
that's one of the things that's always been very interesting to me. Eric Westman was a clinician and researcher, and all of the people at Duke where he's practicing, they would send intractable obesity problems from the orthopedic department. We've got somebody, and they need a knee replacement, but they're just too heavy and too unhealthy to do that surgery on. And you've had some success with people losing weight. So we're going to send them over there. You work with them and see about, and then they get on what is essentially Atkins. He's got a page, it's called his page 4. You can eat this stuff. You can't eat that stuff. You know, you don't eat bread. You don't eat carbohydrates, essentially. Keep your carbs to 20 a day. And people lose a lot of weight, and they feel 1,000% better, and they get healthy, and now they're able to move, which clears up the problems that they had with their knee. And so often they found that people didn't need the surgery if they just ate the right things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's eating the right things, and it's knowing the right things to eat, right? Like, I know we'll talk about this today, and getting into where the epidemic started with the low fat, everything needs to be low fat. And I think people are, we talked about this a little bit last time, people are just now starting to come around, which is crazy to me, that they're starting to realize, oh, low fat's not good. But I don't think people understand, why is that not good? What is in those foods? And I think it's finally, people are maybe starting to have an open ear to, oh, because there's chemicals, it's processed food, it's things that your body has no idea what to do with, right? It's really, really high sugar, so it turns to fat in our liver, and we'll get into all of that. But I think that's a big part of it, is, okay, if we just ate healthy, but people don't understand what to do, and that's where I'm hoping.
And that's, when we were putting together the arc of the episodes, or the way we're going to talk about what we're going to talk about, it's like there was this train in my mind that goes, it's hearts and fats. How did the heart disease and the heart problem change our view of fats? And then how did the fats change up how we viewed diets? And then how did the diets change up how we viewed sugar? And then how did the sugar then create the designer foods that we have? There's this chain of things. And the first in that chain, in my view, is Ancel Keys.
Oh, this story is unreal. Anybody that's listening to this, like, just you'll be able to describe, I'm sure. Go ahead.
So
it's amazing.
I listened to the podcast that you sent me. That was interesting podcast that you sent me.
Oh, you did?
On cholesterol, and they talked a lot about Ancel Keys. Was that your first introduction to Ancel Keys, or have you been aware of him before that?
Yes, I was aware of him before that, but not until maybe 2 years ago, which is so interesting, right? And again, being a dietitian and what I do and what I study, that was never come up. And what bothers me about myself, and not now, but has always, when I look back, is that I never really asked but why, who came up with this? Where did this come from?
And we talked about that last time, that in any realm of science, the history of how you know what you know is important. And in nutrition, it's just, this is the way it is. Shut up.
Sure. And so that's why I'm so passionate now, is I'm still training my brain to go straight to, like, okay, but where did it come from? I mean, I still will always be like, okay, well, let me see the research. But now it's even more, especially since COVID times. But who did this research, and were they paid, and where did it come from? And I just, again, Ancel Keys, maybe almost a couple of years ago that I first heard of him. It was interesting to hear a little bit more in description of his story.
What was interesting about Ancel Keys is he was a physiologist. He was his PhD is like a fish physiology.
Right. And I think he was just, what it was interesting to me in that podcast that I learned was how he became kind of this influencer. He was this charismatic man, supposedly, that was really able to influence people. And obviously he did the 7-country studies. Well, we should explain that a little bit.
Well, he and his wife traveled to Europe, and he's looking at the people in Europe, and it didn't look like there was a lot of heart disease, and people looked healthy, and so he decided to do the 7-country study, which was, and it really wasn't a 7-country study; it was really a 22-country study. Then he took 6 countries and threw them out, and then it was like a 16-country study, and the line for the 16-country study really didn't support his hypothesis, so he threw out.
He just cherry-picked them.
He kept cherry-picking data until he got the graph that he wanted, or the graph that he believed in.
Yep.
The methodology difficulties in that study are legion. If you go back and look at that study, when he did the study, he didn't control for a number of factors. Like one of the examples, when he went in and he was asking people what they were eating to find out what their diet was, it was during Lent in a heavily Catholic country. People are eating a lot more fish during Lent than they eat all the other times. So the methodologies that he used were horrible. But then, as you alluded to, he was very forceful and very charismatic, or I think, in looking back, especially looking at Fauci during COVID, to me, Ancel Keys is very Fauci-like.
Sure.
In terms of he got set up as the guy because fat causes heart disease, and he was on the cover of Time magazine, and he was so not only influential in drawing that saturated fat will cause heart disease theory or hypothesis, but he was also, because of a number of political things, able to shut down the debate on the other side, because there were people on the other side, and we'll get into the other side, but Ancel Keys forced so much of that. But like so many other things, the things that came before Ancel Keys set up where Ancel Keys was going to be successful. After the 7-country study and the heart diet hypothesis, what were the alternatives? In other words, if Ancel Keys had come up with this hypothesis and said, you shouldn't eat saturated fat, which he did, what were you going to change the saturated fat to? And this goes back to the early 1900s. All of the animal fats will go rancid. They will eventually oxidize, whether it's tallow or it's suet or lard, whatever it is. It will go rancid. And Procter and Gamble was trying to find a way to keep fats from going rancid, and the way to do that is hydrogenize the fats. You put hydrogen atoms in the fat chain, which makes the fats much more shelf stable. But the cost of putting the hydrogen atoms in tallow made tallow more expensive, and you could get tallow from rendering the stuff that you had. So there wasn't really a market for using hydrogen to hydrogenate animal fats.
Right.
At the same time, in the early 1900s, 1903 to 1910, one of the biggest industrial byproducts that was waste was cottonseed oil. Cottonseed oil was a huge industrial waste. Well, here we go. Procter & Gamble goes, you know what? We can make that cottonseed oil useful. And they started hydrogenating cottonseed oil to make Crisco. That's why Crisco came about. You know what Crisco stands for?
I don't know what Crisco
It
stands
is
for.
crystallized cottonseed oil.
I did not know that.
That's how Crisco.
What interesting.
That's how Crisco got its name. So in the 30s and in the 40s, especially during the war, but in the 30s and 40s, we were taking an industrial byproduct, hydrogenating it, making it an effective substitute for lard and tallow for frying and putting in cookies and baked goods. And it was marketed at the time as modern. You know, we go back, I'm old enough, I've seen it go back and forth 3 or 4 times, where what we want to do is the natural stuff, and then we want to do the modern stuff, and then we want to do the natural stuff. Well, that was in a spate of where the new, clean, industrial, wonderful fat that's not that yucky old animal fat that we've used for centuries, yuck, yuck, yuck. This is the new thing. So Crisco is coming up the curve as an animal fat, or as a substitute for animal fats, a substitute for saturated fats, just before Keys goes into this saturated fats bad. So you've got this Crisco arc coming into the story from the early 1900s. Then the next piece of this that comes in is in 1925, mid-1920s, the American Heart Association got started. There were some cardiologists started the American Heart Association. It was a small group. They didn't have a whole lot to do. American Heart Association wasn't a big driver. Well, Procter & Gamble wanted to sell more Crisco, and one of the ways to sell more Crisco was to sell it into this heart disease thing.
Mm-hmm.
Crisco, Procter & Gamble gave the American Heart Association $1.7 million in 1948, which exponentially increased the amount of money that the American Heart Association had. So now the American Heart Association has a sponsor that's going to, and we'll talk a bit about American Heart Association studies that they've done, but their big sponsor is now Crisco. And as television is coming on in the 50s, Crisco and the American Heart Association are a major player in the lead up to late 50s, Ancel Keys, fat causes heart disease, and that's the hypothesis. So there's a background that has to do with getting rid of an industrial byproduct, turning an industrial byproduct into a food that we eat, and hydrogenated vegetable oils. And then comes Ancel Keys saying, this is what's killing people.
Sure. And I think that another point to put on that is, why did this go so drastic? Why did Americans care so much to listen to Ancel Keys? And that was really what was so interesting about this, is that in the 60s, when Eisenhower had a heart attack, like, that's when people thought, oh my gosh, how did he have this heart attack? Like, what happened? Like, what do we do? So it's kind of I see your point in comparing it to, that COVID reaction, is that's where America thought, we need to do something. I think that's why Ancel Keys really prompted this and made this move forward, and why people were listening.
Well, and Eisenhower was such a beloved figure as Supreme Commander during the war, and then subsequently as the president, and he was such a beloved person, and he kept having heart attacks, which, if you look at it, and in the 1950s, the incidence of cardiac, if you look at cardiovascular heart disease, the number of people that were dying per 500,000 in the 1950s was roughly 500 people per 100,000.
Okay.
That number has gone down significantly since the 1950s. 2022, 2023 data has that number down to 95, 98. I mean, it's below 100. So it's gone from 500 people per 100,000 to less than 100 per 100,000 that are dying of heart disease. That doesn't tell the whole story. The treatment of heart disease has gotten so much better that a lot of people that would have been dead as a hammer in 1950 aren't dead now, because we can stent the heart. We can, there's a bunch of things that we can do in terms of treatment. But at that time, and the heart disease is still a leading cause of death. It was a leading cause of death then, it's the leading cause of death now. But now the question starts becoming, is cholesterol the problem? Do you know how they came up with the cholesterol clogs your arteries hypothesis?
Oh, like the HDL and the LDL. You mean
just the baseline hypothesis that if you eat cholesterol, it'll clog your arteries.
Yeah. I don't know how that came up, actually.
There was a Russian scientist that was studying cholesterol,
okay,
and he started feeding cholesterol to rabbits.
Okay.
And the rabbits would get cholesterol build up in the cardiovascular arteries just like really, really quickly.
Yeah.
Rabbits were getting desperately sick by feeding them cholesterol. So the hypothesis is, well, there you go. If you eat cholesterol, the cholesterol will clog up your arteries and you'll die. Bob's
Do you know what they were feeding them?
I don't know what cholesterol it was. The point is, rabbits are herbivores. Cholesterol is usually from animal sources, almost exclusively from animal sources.
Yeah.
Rabbits have no biochemistry for clearing cholesterol.
Right.
So if you give rabbits a bunch of cholesterol, they have no way of clearing it, and sure enough, the rabbits get sick and die from cholesterol. That is where the whole cholesterol heart hypothesis came from, is an animal model that had no relationship to the animal model that you needed to run it in, which is human beings.
I did not know that, and I appreciate that. See, that's where I told you, I still train myself. I have to learn, okay, well, where did that part actually come from? If people knew just that alone, it would start getting people to think, oh, okay, maybe that's not right. Where did this start? People today still look for the marketing, and they still market it quite a bit, of no cholesterol. Animal crackers, no cholesterol. Well, yeah, one, why are we worried about that? And two, of course, that little animal cracker didn't have a liver. There was no liver. If that food does not have a liver, there is no cholesterol in it.
Okay. You said animal crackers. I got to tell you my favorite dad joke of all time.
Oh,
a friend of mine comes in and says, yeah, I was going to buy a package of animal crackers, but the seal was broken.
I got it. I had to think about that. I like that. That's really cute.
So so we've got this arc coming together of Crisco gets invented because Procter & Gamble's trying to get rid of some industrial waste. And you've got the fact that somebody in 1920, maybe, early part of the century, fed rabbits a bunch of cholesterol, and the rabbits got sick. And then you've got the American heart disease that gets funded by Crisco, that's coming into a time when heart disease is a really big problem that people are really worried about. And Ancel Keys comes out with a 7-country study, which was a BS study, but it was a study. And then you've got all this pressure going on. So the American Heart Association starts funding studies. And those studies that the American Heart Association is funding, now let's see, would the American Heart Association want to fund studies that would benefit their biggest benefactor, Procter & Gamble? Well, probably. So the studies that were put together for the heart diet hypothesis, the fat hypothesis in the 50s, early 60s, before the National Institutes of Health got involved, were primarily funded by Procter & Gamble because they were the makers of Crisco, and then Nabisco because their baked goods and the baked goods that they were selling in their cookies and crackers and things were using Nabisco. A substantial part of the American Heart Association's yearly income is from licensing the Heart Healthy logo, that they put on everything from Cheerios, reduce your cholesterol, heart healthy, heart healthy. So they have a significant economic driver to put heart healthy on things.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I don't, and that has not gone down in one bit. You will know a little bit more about the AHA and how corrupt it is. Sorry, I hate to say that. But I think what people are starting to need to understand is that cholesterol is just fine. Your body makes it. Your body's going to know what to do with it. If you get too much, it's kind of hard to get too much. I mean, yes, you can. But if you can follow the appropriate plan, I hate to say diet, but you can follow where you actually are eating fats, and it's the good fats, your liver is going to know what to do with it. Your liver does over 500 functions a day. It's an amazing machine if you treat it right. And we'll get into this too, but if you're eating all the high sugar and you're getting all the insulin resistance, sure, then yeah, cholesterol is going to back up and we're going to have bad issues with fats. It's just unfortunate that people still continue to think that fats are bad. There are so many good fats out there that our brain needs from sun up to sundown. We really do need fats for our bodies to go, but there's a way to do it. There's a way for your body to work off the ketosis.
And I think, and the more we're able to communicate with, like the brain is essentially cholesterol. The brain is essentially fat. It is an organ of essentially
water and fat.
Well, that kind of goes. We've talked about the heart diet hypothesis, and that if you eat fat you have heart disease. So, what is the next piece of this? How did that information that you shouldn't eat saturated fat go and affect the diet? And I'm very interested to hear what your education told you about how we need to move. How did we move from those animal fats to the Crisco and hydrogenated and polyunsaturated? When you were in school and doing the dietitian thing, did they discuss that? Was that part of what it is that they were teaching you about how people should eat?
Yeah, so a lot of my focus was the organic chemistry part, so the chemical bonds and how they're broken down, and so the monounsaturated versus polyunsaturated, all that. We talked about trans fats. The trans fats weren't good. It's changed, right? It wasn't. I was in college. I graduated 2006, and so it really wasn't until 2015 that the guidelines came out of absolutely no trans fats in food. So yes, I knew about it, but to get the public to understand what that meant, how you look at hydrogenated vegetable oils, was very sad. It was great when it finally came out in 2015, and I think a lot of the education started to change in universities.
2015?
Yeah, that's when the guidelines came out that they weren't allowed to have.
And when did you graduate?
2006.
So that's effectively 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but we've known trans fats are bad for
you were
90 years.
You were being taught in 2006. It didn't get into the general population in 2015.
Right.
So how long before 2006 was this information that you had, or when did people figure out that these probably weren't the things to eat? Obviously before 2006, because in 2006 it had made it into the textbooks at least.
Yeah, I actually read this one time, and I don't know the exact number, but I joked with 90 years, but it was, I think we have known about it for at least 40 years. I wish I had the stat on that. I'll get back to that. And we could put it in the show notes. But knowing it for years and years, which is today's day, it's the same thing with seed oils, right? American Heart Association still says canola oil is a good source of fat. Are you kidding me? And like the increasing amount of inflammation that causes, and that it causes on your liver and your body to not process fat is incredible. Yeah. So I need to find out the year of that. But I mean, it goes to show, like, there was a study done, it was like almost 40 years ago, or a little bit over 40 years ago, where they compared people on a saturated fat diet versus a polyunsaturated fat diet. And the polyunsaturated fat diet was full of vegetable oils. And in this study, people doubled their rate of heart attacks and heart disease. That was over 40 years ago. And that was just like, and it's just now starting to come out that seed oils are bad, which I don't even know that it's not really, that's coming out if you're looking into it.
One of the interesting pieces, one of the interesting studies, Dr. Paul Mason, who's one of the people that I'm very fond of, the YouTube channel, Low Carb Down Under, has conferences, and they have people come in and speak. And Paul Mason has spoken at a number of those conferences, and he gives the example. And there was a Busman study. It was done in Great Britain, where they looked at vegetable oils versus animal fats, and they traded a bunch of people over. And it was a good study. It was well designed. It had a bunch of, they actually had an interventionist and an epidemiological study, which we'll talk about at length probably. And it was never published.
Mm-hmm.
And some researchers found the data and regenerated the data, and then went and looked in the archives, and basically the team looked at it, and they discovered 35, 40 years ago that vegetable oils were a really bad choice for heart disease.
Mm-hmm.
But they never published the study. And one of the researchers was still alive, so the people that put the study back together went and asked them, why didn't you publish the study? And their answer is, we were just so disappointed in the results.
Mm.
They were so focused on that heart diet hypothesis that saturated fat's bad, that they had good data with good methodology, and they didn't believe it. They were disappointed that the results that they got didn't give them the answer that they thought it would.
Yeah, they didn't want to see it. I mean, the USDA comes out with the dietary guidelines every 5 years, right?
Right.
The USDA board, 90% of the USDA board there's articles on this, very well cited articles. USDA board, 90% of them have conflict of interest with food lobbyists that are paid by Nabisco, Pepsi, Kellogg's, which is crazy. That is our dietary guidelines. These citizens are looking for, this is what I should eat. Okay, which still goes back to what I learned back in college. And that was, 20 years ago? And yet it was even worse before that. That part's unfortunate. I think the thing that's really starting to come out more too, that is, these fats. Yes, these fats are good, what types of fats, make sure that they don't have GMOs in them, make sure they're not overheated, because that stuff is what's going to make your body have inflammation. And I think that word inflammation needs to be more out there versus fat is bad.
Well, and I think we need to have a deep dive.
Yeah, that's another.
Michael and Mary Ann Eads, I think in 90, may have been as far back as the 86. But Michael and Mary Ann Eads wrote the book Protein Power, which was eat, prioritize protein filled with fat. Don't eat a lot of carbs. And this was a long, long time ago. And he writes a weekly Substack or blog, and he's constantly going back and looking at what he thought and how he thought and the things that he found. And he has an interesting theory, and I'll send you a link. He has an interesting thing that maybe there's an argument to be made that the obesity and metabolic health decline that we've seen is as much the fact that we were eating polyunsaturated fats and seed oils as it is that we shouldn't eat carbs. And I mean, I'm as we talked about last week, if you do one thing, take out the carbs. If you take out the carbs, for me, that's the Pareto rule. That's you can get 80% of the benefit by just stop eating carbs. But it's interesting that the polyunsaturated fats and the inflammation caused by polyunsaturated fats, there's an argument for that as a partial driver for the metabolic health issues. So you got polyunsaturated, monosaturated, and then saturated fats. And the polyunsaturated fats are the ones that have been excoriated all the way around. The monosaturates versus the saturated. Where are you on the monosaturates versus the saturated fats?
So it depends on what type and what you're actually eating, right? So you got your saturated and your unsaturated. Saturated are things that are more stable and solid at room temperature. Butter, lard, tallow, coconut oil. And then you've got your polyunsaturated fats and your unsaturated fats that are liquid at room temperature. Problem is, people are getting to I can't believe it's not butter. Do you remember I can't believe it's not butter? I grew up on that. I loved I can't believe it's not butter. But you've got things like your avocados and cottonseed oil and nut oils. I'm actually okay with all of it if you're going to do it in a right way. Like lard, not the greatest thing for you, but if your body is in a state of ketosis, and your brain and your body are feeding off of that fat and it's going to break it down, I'm actually okay with it. There's really, I hate to say this, the fat that I'm not okay with are things mainly like the seed oils, the things like margarine that aren't real food.
Is your driver against those linoleic acid itself, or is it?
Yeah, so the issue is with the omega-6 and omega-3s is most Americans are at about a 22-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Omega-6 are the bad fatty, omega-6 is the bad fatty acid, right? That causes inflammation, for sure, heart disease. Your omega-3s are your good fats, like that you can find in, people hear about salmon, avocado, olive oil. Those are things that help your brain, do great things for you, increase your DHEA, which we really need for our brain, our EPA. It's amazing. We need all the omega-3s. Our ratio, do you know what our ratio should be for omega-6 to omega-3?
I do not know what the ratio should be.
1-to-1.
You think I'm surprised that it's as high as 1-to-1.
No, it should be 1-to-1, but we're generally about 22 molecules of omega-6 to 1 molecule of omega-3.
Well, and the reason that I'm surprised that it's 1-to-1.
Oh, that it should be?
That's the target.
Could be 2-to-1.
The people that are looking for is because the natural fats, the stuff we've been eating for millions of years, tallow and suet and lard. Yes, there are omega-6s in tallow.
Yes, but we don't know that it's the harmful kind. Just like the trans fat. There's trans fat in animal fat. There can be.
Well, just about any kind of fat that you've got has got a mixture of trans fats and right. Saturated fats and unsaturated fats, and I mean it's a piece of nothing is purely one kind of fat.
Right.
And those ancestral sources of fat that we're talking about, suet and lard and tallow, aren't anywhere close to 1-to-1 in terms of linoleic acid, omega-6, omega-3. I mean, they're not even close to 1-to-1. There is a ton of omega-3 versus omega-6. It's not a 1-to-1 thing. So it surprises me that the answer would be 1-to-1, given that historically in the ancestral
I see
fats,
what you're saying.
it would seem to me that if what we've been eating is lard, suet, and tallow for millions of years, well, not millions, hundreds of thousands of years, 100,000, 150,000 years, that whatever that ratio is in those natural fats would be what the healthy ratio is. And if it's, and that's, to me, it would seem like that's the ratio that you'd be trying to get to, is whatever the predominant ratio is in the animal fats. And I don't believe it's anywhere close to 1-to-1.
Because you're saying it should be more high on the omega-3, right? Like if omega-3 is at 1 to 20. I think it more saying how many molecules. So you got 22 molecules of omega-6 versus somebody having 1 molecule of omega-3. I won't be able to say this as good, but I think it's more just, I don't know that it's necessarily of a balance of, okay, how much omega-3 do you have? I think it's more the balance of, so many people have so much more omega-6 versus the omega-3. I do see what you're saying. So I can't figure that out. I don't understand that part, but I see what you're saying. I do think it's more, I'm repeating myself now, that it's such a high ratio of omega-6. That's the point of it.
Reducing omega-6, absolutely. I agree with reducing omega-6. My reaction was to 1-to-1 because the ancestral fats, my understanding of the ancestral fats is they're nowhere close to that in terms of having that much omega-6 in the ancestral fats or fish fats or krill oil or any of those things. It seems to me that I would have guessed that it would be 3, 4, 5-to-1 the other way. That you ought to have 5 times as much omega-3 as omega-6.
Yeah, and I don't know the recommendation on that, except that I want somebody to have so much, depending on the person, maybe 2,500 milligrams of EPA and DHEA a day. Or the 2 servings of salmon a week that's going to give them that, or they take the omega-3 supplement, which is a whole nother subject. But that would be my recommendation of how much omega-3 you should get in your plan, and then watching how much omega-6. So here's the issue with the omega-6 is so many companies started doing, okay, so we need to have lower fat. Well, what are we going to do in our lower fat? Well, we're going to add omega-6s, all the harmful fat that we can get because it tastes good. But now we need to make it a little bit better, and we need to add in sugar. And so I know you were the same way for the last 20 years, have grown up with or eaten things that were low fat, but they're laden with sugar to actually make them taste good. And that's really where the epidemic came with diabetes and issues with heart disease. People associate fat with heart disease. And I would say fat is fantastic for you. You got to do it in the right way. If you're eating fat with sugar, no, then your body's just going to go to junk. There's a lot of things that go on there and a lot of metabolic dysfunctions. But the unfortunate thing is we eat so much of these low-fat foods, or no matter what, just foods in general that are just laden with sugar, and that's when our body can't process it. And we eat the sugar stores as fat. We can talk about all of that with insulin.
But here's what's interesting to me is, and we started this conversation with the USDA dietary recommendations. So let's go back to that for a moment in this arc of why, we've already established that in 1960s and early part of the 70s, fat's bad, fat's bad, fat's bad. Can't eat fat, fat's bad. Saturated fats particularly. So if you're going to eat fats, you need to eat those polyunsaturated vegetable oil fats.
Yes.
And then we get to, we need some dietary recommendations because heart disease problem wasn't going away.
Right.
All of this dietary advice wasn't fixing things.
Right.
So we need to maybe tell people what to eat to help them out.
Yeah.
So the USDA came out with the food pyramid. Do you know anything about the committee, the Senate committee that did the work on the food pyramid?
Oh no, no.
It is the McGovern committee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Senator McGovern was from a farm state. So Senator McGovern had a significant reason to have farm products be really high on what we needed to sell. So not only did you have the Nabiscos and the General Mills and the people who sell grain, but you had a senator from a grain state, and they sat down and they had these dietary recommendation discussions in a Senate hearing.
But I thought it was something to do with his. Sorry, I thought it was something to do with his religion.
There's another. That's another piece of this, and we'll get to that piece. But so when they brought in the people from the National Science Foundation and the scientists, there were a number of scientists in the hearings that were saying, we don't have good science on this. We can't perpetrate a huge experiment on the entire population until we solidify the science. And the answer that they got was eerily similar to COVID. Eerily similar. The argument was, we don't know everything and maybe we're wrong, but this is so important that we can't hold off until we have all the answers. There's people are going to die. If we wait until we get the answers, people are going to die. Very similar. The very similar arguments made by a very similar person. Ancel Keys was making that argument in the same way that Anthony Fauci made that argument. And that's one of the reasons that I'm particularly worried about what's going to happen with the COVID vaccine in the next 20 years, because the process by which we vaccinated is so similar to the process by which we created the food pyramid. And I saw it fail so miserably in the food pyramid place which is a whole nother story. So after they decide they're going to give recommendations, the Senate staffer that worked for McGovern that was going to write up the recommendations was a vegan and a member of the Church Seventh-day Adventists. So he had a political driver as a senator's aide from a farm state to trust that we needed a whole bunch of grains and a whole bunch of carbohydrates. And he's a Seventh-day Adventist, so he has a religious reason to believe that. So when that initial food pyramid came out, there was not a scientific consensus. The scientists that got listened to were the scientists that were arguing hardest for the people who are making the decision that are benefiting by having low-fat recommendations out there to go make the food pyramid and eat a lot of bread and eat a lot of pasta and eat a lot of stuff that has Crisco in it, which rings back to that shortening, the vegetable shortening that people were using to make those cookies and crackers and creams and things like that. So now we've got this nexus of interests aligned to get us to change the recommendation of the diet so that fats are way up at the top of the pyramid and bread forms the base of the pyramid. So are you old enough to remember Snackwell cookies?
Oh, yeah. I ate Snackwell. Oh, yeah. Along with my lean cuisine or my Hot Pocket, my lean pocket.
And
those are, the chemicals and hydrogenated vegetable oils and things in those it's like chemical warfare in your body.
It's amazing. Well, and three things occur as we've talked. There's three things that occur to me. One is fat is flavor. I barbecue a lot and I smoke meat a lot, and fat's flavor. The reason brisket's good is because there's a lot of fat in it. So fat is flavor. So if you take the fat out of things, they don't taste good.
Right.
So what was the answer for the food companies?
You just add in that sugar.
Load up on the sugar. So that brings me to the second thing, is in nature, which is what we evolved to eat. Can you name a food that has sugar and fat in it?
No. In nature?
Yeah. Where do you have any food out there that has,
just a cow's milk.
Milk. Mother's milk, particularly. If you want to take an organism and fatten it up and make it grow quickly, what do you feed it? something that's got sugar and fat in it.
Yeah, which is usually, they'll even do, or just straight sugar. Like that is the way they fatten these cows up so fast. There was a truck, I don't know where, what year this was. I think it was like maybe 5 years ago. It was a truck that tipped over on a highway that was going to feed all the cattle. You know what it was full of? Skittles. All Skittles. It was, I think they maybe had some other candy in there. That is, most of what they're fed is just sugar. And it's still in the packaging also, by the way, which is why our meat is full of plastics. Anyway, sorry, I go off subject.
I sent you the plastics link where the guys that did that database, and you sort through the database and look at the number of microplastics, which is a whole other thing. So
yes, it's sugar and antibiotics. That's what they're eating.
So we got this arc where we start with Ancel Keys and that the fat heart hypothesis, and the fat heart hypothesis comes over into demonizing fats. Mm-hmm. So we demonize fats. And then we're left with, how do we recommend that people eat if they can't eat fats? And we got to sugar and the food pyramid in 1977. Was when the first food pyramid came out. And then they've had 5-year updates since then.
In which have not been updated. They now have eathealthy.org if you want to see the healthy plate option now. But it still has your option of have your serving of milk, which drives me insane. Like, no talk about what type of milk, but have your serving of milk, have your serving of your grains, and then your fruit and your protein. And it's all wrong. I mean, if you really want to prevent chronic disease and you want to prevent diabetes and heart disease, as you said last time, the food pyramid needs to be flipped upside down. I will recommend most of the time about 10 to 15% of protein, depends, maybe 5% of fat, 5% of carbohydrates, 80% fat. Everybody's different, right? For some people, it might be completely carnivore, and we're getting even less than that. For some people, it might need a little bit more protein and a little bit less fat. It depends on your body and the way your body absorbs and digests. But as you said, food pyramid should be flipped upside down, and that hasn't changed at all.
Have you read Nina Teicholz's book?
No.
Interesting. She really debunks the science of fat causing fat, and I mean it's pretty simplistic. I mean it's a simple argument. You eat fat, you get fat.
Yeah.
When I was a low fat eating person back in the height of the SnackWell days and the fat free Fig Newtons.
Yeah.
I mean, I can slam I could eat a bucket of fat free Fig Newtons right now.
I had those with my Lean Pocket also.
When all of that was at its height, and that was absolutely the answer, is the fat free stuff and lowest fat that you could get, and those dietary guidelines were out. It still made sense. Two things made sense about that as an argument to lose weight. Okay, it's pretty easy to argue if you eat fat, you get fat. Mm-hmm. So at the time, the argument was, if you eat fat, it's a lot easier for your body to store fat if you eat fat. Mm-hmm. It's almost like there was this concept that if you took a syringe full of butter and injected it into your arm, you inject that butter into your arm, it would just run to the fat cells. Like, there was no discussion of the biochemistry and what your body would have to do to break that fat down through the cellular biochemical processes to in turn store it as fat.
Right.
It was just a eat fat, you get fat, number one.
Yeah.
Number two, fat is calorically dense.
Mm-hmm. Double
Carbs and proteins are about 4 calories per gram, fat's 9.
Yep.
So if you eat fat, you're at a caloric disadvantage. The more fat that you got, the more your caloric disadvantage is on the whole calories in, calories out thing, which is another deal that we'll talk about. So it was very easy for the food people to take that argument that fat's bad for you, which was from Ancel Keys, and bring that over to, if you don't want heart disease, you need to cut down on fat. So if we cut down on fat, what do we have to do to get it? And that argument is, if you want to get slimmer, don't eat fat. Fat's calorically dense, and sugar is a lot better because you can eat more sugar than you can fat for the same number of calories. Is that the way you were taught in school?
Yeah, absolutely. That fat is bad. We should have, same thing, about 60%, 65% of carbohydrate. I think it was maybe, 20% protein, let's say. These ratios will vary, and 20% fat. That's exactly what we were taught. And man, he said something that was just really interesting that I wanted to go back to that I can't remember. But fat is, so here's the thing. It can be bad. Like I say, oh, it's great. We should eat it. But again, I cannot press this enough. It's if you're following it correctly, because your body, your brain and your body want to use fat, should use our fat as fuel. Once we add sugar in with that, our brain is, we might have mentioned this before, it's like cocaine in our body. It's just like, that's what it will use. And that is when everything is converted as fat. So yes, this is the problem with like a keto diet, right? Or maybe Atkins that a lot of people will go on. Can it be good for you? Yes. Now, there are some people, different body types that it might not work for, but it's great for you. The problem is when it becomes a diet and people get off of that, and now they're used to eating a lot of butter. They're used to making these really great high-fat keto snacks that are good when your body's in ketosis, because your body will burn that for fuel. But the moment you add that sugar in, which is like most of our world, we can't get away from sugar, that's when everything is stored as fat and causes inflammation. So when we eat that sugar, along with fat or not along with fat, but most of the time we're eating it with fat, right? We have a pasta meal, we have a sandwich that we think is good, which I'm not saying it's bad, but our sugar goes up, we eat, right? Insulin goes up. So when we eat the sugar, it's metabolized and it goes into our bloodstream. Well, think of this sugar sitting in this bloodstream. We need something to get it out of our bloodstream and into our cells for energy. Insulin comes from our pancreas and says, I got it. I'm the key. I'm going to unlock this cell and I'm going to get that sugar into there. We're going to end in just a little bit, maybe as fat. Here's the problem. Insulin goes up. It increases our sex hormone, or our fat storing hormone of cortisol. Cortisol is a good thing, but that goes up and up. It caps eventually. There's this whole cascade of events that I won't go off too much into right now, right? It reaches into our sex hormones, progesterone, testosterone. Now we're estrogen dominant. So much of that is stored as fat. Here's the issue. When we eat this sugar, our body only needed like maybe 15%, maybe 5%. The rest of it, that 85%, is stored as fat. So we eat sugar, insulin is released, it opens the cell, right, gets in there, gets the sugar out. But the issue is your body's only going to do that so much. Your body's only going to release so much insulin over and over. Eventually it gets tired. That's when we get into insulin resistance. And our body, we're like, what is going on? I'm having all these issues, breaking out, depression, can't think, which is why there's type 3 diabetes, of Alzheimer's. We're estrogen dominant. We can't lose weight. And it's this whole cascading.
Interesting. Eric Westman is the first person I saw that put this together. Normal blood sugar, 100 milligrams per deciliter.
Mm-hmm.
That's the normal blood sugar.
Yes.
At 100 milligrams per deciliter, how many milligrams of sugar are circulating in your bloodstream?
You have 100 milligrams.
100 milligrams per deciliter, which is normal blood sugar.
Mm-hmm.
How much sugar is that in your bloodstream?
It should only be 5.
5 grams.
Mm-hmm.
5 grams of sugar is about a teaspoon.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime that you put more than a teaspoon of sugar in your body,
mm-hmm.
it becomes a metabolic crisis that the body has to do something with.
Mm-hmm.
And it is amazing to me that, a Diet Coke, a can of Coke has got like 40 grams of sugar. It's got 8 times the amount of sugar that your body considers to be normal.
It should be illegal. Coke should be illegal. Like the fact that we're allowed to drink this much is not okay. 1/4 of a cup. Just because it's straight sugar, and why do we need it? And then that causes an insulin response, and it causes ghrelin, which is a hormone in our brain that makes us think that we want more, 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 and we can't stop, right? It knocks out the leptin satiety hormone. But the fact that you can have a whole can at 40 grams.
A whole can? Darling, go by Sonic, Route 44, Route
Oh my gosh.
44 Dr. Pepper.
That is what bothers me. And that's one of the many reasons why I'm so glad RFK is, I really believe, everybody says, well, we'll see what he does, but I really believe he is going to change chronic disease in our country. I don't know that would be illegal, but it should be. Why are cigarettes illegal?
Well, cigarettes aren't illegal. Cigarettes are just illegal for children.
Not illegal. But why is there so much talk about how that's so toxic to our body? I didn't mean to say illegal, but yet there's no talk about Coke and how many, what does that mean? 40 grams of sugar. So that's 10 teaspoons. Could you imagine just eating 10 teaspoons in 30 minutes and what that does to our adipose tissue and our fat cells? So our fat cells will only grow, right? They get bigger and they get bigger and they get bigger. We might, and then they're going to be more and more and more. We might be able to shrink our fat cells, but the more that we grow our fat cells, they never go away, ever. And so they can grow, but and not to say, if somebody needs to lose weight, it's okay. But that's the unfortunate thing, is that this sugar-laden diets that we don't understand is only increasing the amount of fat cells in our body.
And not only is it increasing the fat cells, when the fat cells grow to some extent, then they get necrotic because they can't get any bigger.
Right.
And as they get sick, because the fat is a very active, in terms of the endocrine system, the fat is a very active player in the endocrine system that people didn't recognize for a long time. It was just like storage, and they didn't realize the role that fat had. But as those fat cells get big, they start throwing off more inflammatory stuff because they can't get any bigger because they keep getting fed that insulin. And the insulin sensitivity starts in muscles, and by the time you get to where your fat is insulin sensitive, there's no other place for that glucose to go. And it's just horrible.
Yep, that's just where it sits. And then that's where we get the insulin resistance and metabolic disease. And it's really hard for people to come back from that, because what happens when somebody has insulin resistance or metabolic dysregulation? They get put on medication. So we're never getting to the root cause of the issue, which I truly believe most all of it comes back to sugar.
I think it comes back to sugar, and the thing that is the most frustrating to me, Gary Taub has made this point in his book, The Case for Keto. And he actually gave the quote: in the seminal biochemistry textbook, the gold standard biochemistry textbook, and I'll probably put it up and maybe even overdub it so you can see the quote. They go through what creates fat synthesis in fat cells and discuss the biochemistry for how insulin goes through the insulin storage process to put sugar into fat cells.
Yep.
And that is the central, everybody knows it, it's absolutely the case. This is how fat cells grow, is in the presence of carbohydrates and insulin. On the same page, down at the bottom of the page, it says that the reason people get fat is they eat a surplus of calories, that there is too much energy going in. This is so ingrained in the minds of the people who do nutrition that they are able to argue on the same page of a biochemistry textbook that we get fat through a different process than our individual cells get fat.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Huh. What is this book called? I thought I had seen this book, but
the biochemistry textbook. I'll have to get you the name. I don't remember the name of the biochemistry textbook, but it's in Gary Taub's Case for Keto.
The Case for Keto. Okay.
The Case for Keto book by Taubes is the one where he gives the example, and it was just fascinating to me that that the scientists are so indoctrinated in the calories in, calories out, fat's bad, a calories a calorie, blah, 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 blah world, that on the same page they can make an argument that we get fat as individuals for a different reason than our fat cells grow.
Yeah, there was there's a lady on the USDA board, and her name is Fatima Stanford. She's a professor at Harvard also. Interesting. I think her last name is Stanford. And she wrote an article and said, it's pretty recently, that said, the obesity epidemic is truly due, and she's on the USDA board, is completely from our genes. And that I'm like, are you kidding? I had to reread this several times because I couldn't believe that this was actually out there, that you can't exercise it off. It's just due to our genomics, it's due to our genes, and nothing's going to happen. I think she works with the AHA also, but she's also paid by food lobbyists as well.
Well, and we've talked about hearts and fats and diets, which gives us, we've been at it for about an hour. The next time we get together, we'll talk about the calories in, calories out piece
Yes.
Okay, now we've gotten to where you got to eat sugars. What do the sugars do? And then calories in, calories out. And we'll get into that insulin model. But from wrapping it up standpoint, one of the things that a doctor that I talked to, he saw me losing weight and feeling good, and he ended up reading some of the stuff that I gave him, and he's lost a ton of weight and has done very well. And he made this point to me, is that you do the science, and it takes a while for the science to get communicated and for people to do enough replication of the study, or the study's been out there long enough for the research environment to come to, yeah, that's the right answer. There's been a fundamental change.
Sure.
It's not, you can't just change everything on one study, but we've studied this and we've got to change. And okay, so after the science then changes, now you have to change the medical textbooks. Well, medical textbooks, the textbooks for medical school, they don't come out every year. It's every 3 years to 5 years, a 3 or 5 year cycle to get those textbooks updated to what the science is. So then you teach that for a period of time to the doctors that are going to go out there and practice, which then reinforces what people believe and what gets studied. His point is that if you went as quickly as you could go, you got a study that says polyunsaturated fats are bad. We're going to go immediately and put that in the medical textbook, the next section of the medical textbook. So for the 4 years that people are in that medical program, they learn that that's bad. So that by the time they get into practice, if everything goes immediately and there's no delay, it's 9 to 12 years from the time something is studied to doctors are teaching it. Or it is being taught to doctors, or that doctors are able to operate on it.
Sure.
Which was why it was interesting to me that you graduated in 2006, polyunsaturated fats, hydrogenated vegetables. We've known that for a long time. It's not now starting to be talked about until 2015. Here we are in 2025, 10 years after that, and we're still seeing people from Harvard and Tufts, the Chan School and the Friedman School come out and say things like, it's genetics.
I just had an instance. I know this is completely off subject, but it was just really interesting when I was at my annual OBGYN appointment, and sorry, this might be too TMI for you, but my cycles were a little off, right? They're fine. It's fine. This is too much. Is cycle stuff
no, you're good
for you? Okay. So, my cycles were usually 4 days, we're good to go. And now they've been going from day 17. So a woman, anybody listening, has a 30-day cycle. They've been starting maybe at 17 to 30. Like 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks. And so I'm like, what's going on? I got a ultrasound just to make sure everything's good due to the way they are. And there's just spotting, and it's kind of more recent. And we've had some hormonal changes. I really feel comfortable about it. I know my body very well. I know what I'm eating. I actually know what I haven't been eating. That was my biggest thing is I kind of realized, oh, that's why we should go to doctor's appointments because it makes you talk about yourself. Even though I talk to people all day about this and about hormone balance, I still was like, oh my goodness. Yeah, I haven't been eating the amount of fats versus proteins that I should be eating. I've actually been like barely eating. Anyway, it was unfortunate that this is a new OBG. She is young. And she immediately says, well, we could just put you on birth control. And I'm like, have you read? She's new. She's super young. And my thought is exactly what you just said is how this education is getting to these new doctors. Again, I know that's off subject with fat. I'm sure we'll talk about this again with hormones and especially with being estrogen dominant. But it really hurt my heart. And I have it on my list. I haven't done it yet. I've been meaning to get some articles together, whether she reads it or not. Just like, have you not like heard anything about why birth control is bad? Like terrible.
Well, and
but it's what she was taught.
There's another component of this. Dr. Ken Berry, another great YouTube channel. One of the things that Dr. Ken Berry talks about, it's another. Other people have used the phrase. Ken Berry talks about it. It's eminence-based medicine instead of evidence-based medicine. Yeah. The most eminent voice in that area, and this is, COVID's an example. Ancel Keys, we've been talking about that today. It's an example. Everybody listens to the guy that's the long-term, knowledgeable. The person that's spent his 30 years doing the research, and he's the most knowledgeable guy. He's the eminent fat metabolism guy. So he says it, and everybody falls along. And Ken Berry was given an example. Postpartum, he's got a patient, and they said immediately, you need to get that vitamin D booster to the baby because vitamin D, there's no vitamin D in mother's milk. Ken Berry's like, well, wait a minute. Why? We've been having babies for a long time, and we've never had to supplement vitamin D. They didn't supplement vitamin D 1,000 years ago,
right?
And babies still survived. The attending physician tells these residents, this is the way it is. And in medical training, you don't go up against him. You just salute and drive on. So how much of the stuff, and going back to your OB-GYN story, how much of that you might have learned it or you might have read it in medical school, but then you go into an internship and then you go into a residency and you're dealing with the senior residents and the doctors that have the long lab coats because they're the important doctors that tell you what you need to do, and you're not going to go stand around and tell them they're wrong. So how much of their education gets beat out of them by the older, more experienced doctor so that by the time they get to practice, they've lost a lot of the stuff that they were able to learn or could have learned because the eminence-based medicine versus the evidence-based medicine pollutes them.
Right. It's so true. And I think it takes a patient to say, hey, watch this or listen to this podcast or watch this 5-minute YouTube video on your way home from the amazing amount of hours that they work. And just get a little bit of an idea of what's going on here. And hopefully that will spark some of them, not many because they're busy, to be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be talking to my
and going back and circling back around to the Bobby Kennedy thing and leveraging off of what you're talking about is how people are getting smarter about these things. That's one of the things that Ken Berry is another doctor that talked about it. Gary Taubes also talked about it in the Case for Keto. If you remember the last time we talked, Gary Taubes' article on the Atkins diet, which was in the 2001-2002 timeframe from the New York Times Magazine, he went out to try to interview doctors about Atkins diet. And what he found in 2002 when he was doing the interviews is that doctors would tell him, oh yeah, that's a great way to lose weight. Doctors would tell him, yeah, if I need to lose some weight, I'll jump on the Atkins diet for a month or two and then I'll lose the weight that I need to. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, but it's off the record. The doctors in 2002 were like, no, I don't want my name associated with the Atkins diet.
Yeah.
We go forward to Case for Keto was written 4 years ago, 5 years, but 2020 timeframe.
Okay.
Tens of thousands of doctors are now practicing keto. There are Facebook groups in Canada with 7,000 and 8,000 doctors in the metabolic health space that are doing it.
Amazing.
The ability to discuss these things is fundamentally changed. And he talks about in his book the conversion moment. Steven Pinker talks about the conversion moment, and he talks about it in the negative side. That conversion moment where someone tells their story and they get to that moment of clarity that makes them understand, and that's when they're a convert. Whether it's a convert to a religion or convert to a way of eating or to a political party, there's the moment of conversion.
Yeah.
Ken Berry talks about his moment of conversion. He's a practicing physician, and he's telling his people, eat less, move more, get some exercise, cut out the fat, and they're getting fatter and sicker and fatter and sicker. And Ken Berry is like, patients suck. I tell them stuff and they don't do it. And the idea is I'm giving them advice. They are clearly not following the advice. So my patients suck, which is what you mentioned earlier about people that believe that their patients just aren't following the advice.
Right.
And then Ken Berry got a little older and he started gaining weight. And he gained a lot of weight, and he had a lot of acid reflux. He was saying that none of the purple pill samples that he got in his office ever got to patients because he used them all. And he felt terrible, and he was getting fat, and he was getting pre-diabetic, and he's like, okay, I got to get on the program. So he starts riding his bike to work, and he starts cutting down calories and eating less and moving more, and he doesn't get any better. And then he had his conversion moment that went, maybe my advice sucks. Maybe it's not me.
Yeah, interesting.
And that was the conversion moment. And Taubes talks about that a lot in all of these doctors that he interviewed and talked about in the Case for Keto, is that doctors, because of this background radiation, if you will, there's some background radiation of keto out there, and doctors start seeing that they know that they're doing what they're saying that their patients should do.
Yeah.
So they're willing to try it themselves. And that's what is moving forward. And I think that we've got that reaching critical mass out there at the time that Bobby Kennedy comes in, and that maybe push us over the edge. So what do you want Bobby Kennedy to do first?
That's a great question. Oh, that's a really good question.
And I'll give you my answer. I mean, I asked the question. I've thought about it over and over and over again. I really want him to talk about prioritize protein, get the protein that you need to be healthy, eat the fat that you need to get this energy that you need, and eating good fats, animal-based fats, and then control the carbohydrates. I mean, I don't know that that's, he talks a lot about organic foods. I'm not sold on the organic label of foods, because if I go in and pick up stuff in Sprouts that says organic and then read the ingredients list, it's horrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, you really have to know the farm that they're getting it from.
So I would really like them to start talking about carbs first, because I think that's the Pareto concept. That's where we can get most of it done. So where would you want him to start?
So it's hard to not say the same, right? Because overall, that is what's going to help less inflammation in our body, which is the thing that is really wreaking havoc on our health. And with insulin resistance. I mean, more people are insulin resistant. 76% of people have fatty liver disease and don't even know it, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So it is hard not to agree with that. Right alongside with that would be the food dyes and the chemicals. So I think we mentioned this last time. There's awareness, right? They took out Red 40, Red 3, there's still Red 40. I would that's like just a small stepping stone. But I would really like that. Our body does not know how to process it. And unfortunately, it's the same thing going into inflammation in our body. And causing endocrine hormone disruptors in our body, which is the other reason why so many people are depressed, low energy, struggle losing weight. So I would agree with you. And then hand in hand would be the food dyes.
So next time when we get together, we've gone through this arc of why fats, how did we get the diet and the fat hypothesis, and what the fat hypothesis did to food. And the next time we'll talk about foods and sugar, and then sugar and sugar's influence on designer foods and ultra-processed foods. We'll talk about that next time, and then talk some more about where Bobby Kennedy is and what kind of changes he's doing. And I look forward to it.
Same here. Thanks, Woody.